Welcome back to the Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence. I'm your host, Sarah Payne. Today, we're tackling a topic that too many healthcare brands still get wrong: executive social media. In 2025, it's not enough for brands to show up online. Your leaders have to show up too. Because in healthcare, people trust people, not logos. But here's the problem. The old playbooks, corporate updates, sterile press releases, navel-gazing posts, they're not building credibility anymore. In fact, they're hurting it. Today, I'm joined by Arik, social media strategist who's worked with more than 80 brands, including clients like Walmart, Sleep Number, and Dairy Queen, to provide customized social media audits, strategies, coaching, and content development. Arik is joining us today to talk about why executive presence now matters more than brand voice, what outdated practices you need to ditch, and how healthcare CMOs can help their executives build real influence, not just rack up posts that nobody reads. If you're serious about building a brand people trust, it's time to rethink your strategy. Arik, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's dive right in. In today's world, why is an executive social media presence arguably more influential than a brand page, especially in healthcare?
What I've found in all the work I've done, especially on like audits and LinkedIn over the last, 5-6 years, is that the brand page is still essential. You still need a brand corporate LinkedIn page for sure. It's almost like a home base, like a website
Yeah.
basically. However, most brands are seeing much more bang for their engagement buck when it comes to people, especially leaders, on LinkedIn versus the corporate page. The leader pages are usually outflanking, not always, outflanking the corporate page, sometimes by a factor of 5, 10, I've seen as high as. And I'm not talking about little brands. I'm talking about big Fortune 50 brands, some of which are right here in Minnesota, on a regular basis. So you're seeing CEOs that are outpacing the corporate page, and they'll see routinely, thousands of engagements, whereas the corporate page is getting in the hundreds, the low hundreds. So that's pretty typical. In at least right now, things can change, and I think it mostly goes back to the fact that it's LinkedIn's a person-to-person platform, probably even more so than some of the other social networks. So like people want to connect with people, they want to have real conversations. Real conversations are still happening there, and that just can't happen from brand to person as much as it can person to person.
Yeah, and I mean, let's be real. We're both in marketing. Our listeners are in marketing. A lot of people are smart. They know the brand pages are led by a marketing department, and so it can sometimes give that feel, right, that you're being positioned or sold to versus that, to your point, that person to person relationship.
Yeah,
you've worked in a lot of different industries, Arik, not exclusive to healthcare, but what do you think are some of the unique challenges that healthcare leaders face when it comes to building their presence on either LinkedIn or other platforms?
On LinkedIn, I would say you have the built-in disadvantage of HIPAA compliance.
Absolutely.
Where there's going to be, if you're the CEO of a manufacturer or retail organization, you can tell customer stories up and down the line. Certainly with getting approval from the customer or, and things of that nature. But in healthcare, obviously, it's not completely off the table, but a lot of that, it's just tougher to do. So I think that's probably a big hurdle. And that's a key thing that a lot of leaders will want to talk about. Number two, I would say that, it's in healthcare. LinkedIn's a professional network, right? And healthcare stuff, a lot of the stuff's more, the good stuff at least, is touchy-feely and it's personal and stuff like that. And my guess is a lot of healthcare leaders don't want to go down that road because it's a personal or it's a professional network, and we want to talk about business there. And I don't know if I would totally buy that, because some of the stuff most of the stuff we see that works the best on LinkedIn is more of that personal content and more real content. That seems to be what people want. Yes, they want a professional lens to it for the most part, but the personal stuff is still resonating with people. But I venture to guess that that's probably a pretty big barrier for a lot of healthcare executives as well.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And just would be interested in you commenting just on a trend level, sort of more at large, not just talking about executive leaders, but just even individuals, right? Who have a LinkedIn profile, are active on LinkedIn. it seems like there has been an appetite, a trend towards content seems to be performing better when people are sharing more of these personal stories, challenges they're facing in their personal life. It didn't used to be that you would see, your colleague post about a challenge their son or daughter might be facing in getting their first job out in the real world, or a health crisis that their family might be facing. There seems to be a lot more of that personal pulling back the curtain storytelling. Am I imagining that, Arik, or do you see that there's a trend happening there?
Yep. No, 100%. And with the everyday people are globbing onto it a little bit, right? And you're seeing more of that almost to a fault now. The challenge is like, I'll speak for myself, I guess, but I would assume this applies to a lot of other people. It's like, I want to see the processes and the thinking and the behind the scenes stuff of everyday people. But like, what makes that specifically interesting for executives is like, for years and years and years, for as long as I've been working, executives, you're in this ivory tower, right? And who knows what they do all day? I don't know. I'm not an executive. I'm not a CEO, but everyone wants to know. My last full-time job was with Fairview here in town, and I worked on a corporate communications team. And in our surveys, time after time after time after time, people would say they want to hear more from our CEO. They want to know more about our CEO, all that stuff. There's a severe appetite for that. Like, they want to know more about what goes on every day. A little bit more about their decision making, and maybe even a little bit more about their personal life, like who they are as a person. So I think there's a huge demand on that from the executive team. Now, the problem is executives usually don't want to do that because that's opening them up to risk. That's opening them up to looking bad. That's opening them up to attacks. And some of those things might happen. But I would argue the upsides of that far outweigh the few trolls you're going to get. And you're not going to get that many troll jobs on LinkedIn anyways. So it feels like a relatively worthwhile, if you want to call it a gamble to go that way. But that is definitely a trend we're seeing a lot more of on LinkedIn for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. Just out of curiosity, are there executive leaders that are doing some of this more sort of personal, pull back the curtain style of post that you think seems to be really working well? Anybody come to mind there?
Let's see, in the Twin Cities, at least in this market, one of the people that I used to point to a lot, and I haven't checked his profile recently, has been Jeff Martha with Medtronic. He was an early adopter. And granted, now speaking of teams of people, I know he has a team of people that help him, so it's definitely not just him. But he's a good example of what it looks like, where he's certainly talking about Medtronic and their initiatives and their strategic, initiatives and all that stuff a lot of the time. But once in a while, he mixes in some personal stuff. He's pretty good about doing that. And now he's a former sales guy, so like he's going to be more apt to do that versus other. Omar Ishrak, their former CEO, was an engineer, so he's a little different than Jeff is a sales guy. But he's probably the one in the healthcare sector that probably pops to mind right off the top.
That's a great one. That's a great example. I agree with you that he does it well. And just out of curiosity, what percent, if you had to guess, what percent of these executives are running their own social media channels? 20%?
Yeah, I bet you. Maybe it's a little higher than that. I don't know. But you got to think most of if you're talking about healthcare executives, it's mostly larger, at least here in the Twin Cities, it's mostly larger companies, right? You're talking about the big healthcare organizations. You're talking about the med tech organization. Those are all huge organizations that have people like you and me helping them. So it's not like it's, if you're working in retail, there's certainly smaller companies that have owners and founders that are probably doing it themselves. But healthcare, I venture to guess the number is lower than it would be in other.
It's interesting from what I see on my side of things is there are some CEOs, and I give them a lot of credit for this, that just frankly it's really important to them that they're running their own.
Good. Yeah.
Right? And I will fully support that. I am all for that authenticity as long as there's space and time for it, right? We can chat about what's working, what's not, new ideas, different ways of thinking. But they really want that to be their voice. And I love that.
And I think that's obviously the ideal scenario is that it's almost like a coaching relationship. You coach them up to doing it themselves,
Yes.
and then they do it themselves long term. That's what you want, obviously.
So Arik, let's bust some outdated thinking that might be out there. What are some of the old school practices that healthcare brands should just stop doing when it comes to executive social?
I think number one would be sharing links. We still see an awful lot of that from brands and people on LinkedIn. And I would argue at this point in 2025, that's pretty clearly established that that's not going to work. So I would not include links at all. And people will say, well, why don't we just throw it in there for people that want to link to it? It's like, nobody wants to link to it, or no one wants to click off. That's number one. And that's a hard habit to break, because we've been advising people to do that for the last 15 years. And all of a sudden we're saying, nope, don't do that. The channels don't want you to leave. People don't want to leave. That's wrong. So it's going to take a while to break that one. I understand, but that's a big one. That would be the first thing I would say. I think just being too heavy on just the notion that we have to talk about the company all the time.
Yes.
I'm up on that a lot, right? Like, we have to talk about earnings. We have to talk about strategic imperatives. We have to talk about how we're doing. It's like, yes, a little bit, but I think it's okay to talk about, like I see very few executives actually talking about like industry trends and like what's going on in their industry, or what's going on, in general out there. And people want to hear from them on that kind of stuff. And I don't know why they're not commenting on that. That seems weird to me, but that's a huge area of opportunity. And then I would say number three is kind of like, I think a lot of executives that I've worked with in the past they're very reticent to have photos of themselves, whether it's selfies or other pictures. They don't want themselves out there a lot, which is good. I can appreciate that, because that's kind of like servant leadership 101. But the fact remains, like, people need to see your face. So it's almost, I mean, if it's me, that's non-negotiable, man. You signed up to be the CEO or the CFO or the CMO. Like, this comes the job. You don't just get to hide in the corner because you have this job. You're getting paid a lot of money, and you need to be the face of this, which means we need to see your face. So advising them and coaching them through that process to be okay with that. And not that it has to be selfies. It doesn't have to be, super vulnerable, but getting executives okay with us seeing their faces on LinkedIn through photos and video, I think is a big hurdle too.
Yeah. And I think Jeff Murtha does a good job of that. You see him, he might be doing a big keynote presentation, but he snaps a selfie backstage with someone else, one of the event organizers, or an employee, or a customer, whomever it is, right? It's probably a customer. They do a lot where they bring the customers on stage, and it's like, thanking so-and-so for sharing their story today at this big event we're doing. That's just really, it draws you in, right? Because you get to see that this guy who's on the stage is the same guy, right, behind the scenes. And you get a little window into that. What is it like to sit in that tower and do this job?
And that's the key too. Like, he could have if he does a presentation like that, right? The vast majority of executives or people would get like the glamour shot of him on the stage in some capacity, which is okay. But what's way better is what you're describing, like some kind of behind the scenes shot of him backstage with people, like way better, because like that's access. It's more personal, it's more intimate. Like, that's what people want. And so it's almost like executives thinking through LinkedIn content as like social first versus like, I'm going to this event, we'll just get a bunch of stuff, I'll throw it up on LinkedIn. It's like, well, that's fine, but like, that's not going to work as well as if you think about LinkedIn first. It's a much better, much different mindset. And that's why Jeff performs so well, I think, because he has that team helping him, and they really get it, and they're really good at it now.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to double click on your point about not focusing so much on the company focused posts. I think that's really, really important. And we in marketing have been talking about this for a long time, right? And we're still seeing that high percentage of content really focused on, I call it the navel gazing stuff, right? Look at what we did today. Look at how great we are. And really, that should be more in the 15 to 20% of the overall. That's my opinion. You probably have your sort of breakdown of what you like to see. And particularly the leaders I think do this well in healthcare. Sachin Jain, who's the CEO of Scan Health, what he spends his 50 to 20% doing is actually giving kudos and welcome notes to like employees, maybe it's welcoming a new team member. It's very cultural focused. It's not earnings focused. And I love that. And then the other, 80-85% for him is very focused on industry issues, right? What is the change we need to drive inside of healthcare? And you're absolutely right that we need to see more and more of those conversations. And part of the strategy I use when I'm trying to convince a brand or a leader why they need to spend a higher percent of their time having that conversation is because they're also telling me in a different meeting that they want to get on more conference stages. They want to be selected as a keynote speaker. And I'm saying, you want to be a keynote speaker, you want to be invited to the stage, then your social media profile has got to be filled with this point of view that you want to be out there talking about.
100%. I mean, and that's easy to do, right? Between video content, text content. I mean, they have the tools there to do it. It's just a matter of they want to stick their neck out. And that's part of what we talked about before. They're not comfortable sticking their neck out there on social. They might be comfortable doing it on a stage for sure in front of people in person, but for some reason on social, they're very reticent to do that, which is an interesting phenomenon, I think.
And I think part of it is they just haven't built the muscles for it yet, right? Yeah. Like they don't really quite know how to do it and strike the right balance. Because, you and I know we get a meeting with them and they're super passionate about these things. Passionate, charismatic, could go on for 45 minutes in a conference room about, what needs to change in healthcare, and just getting them to think about how to channel those same ideas and that same voice through social media, I think is one of the hurdles, is just to help them see it that way.
Well, the culture piece you mentioned before too is another interesting component where that's usually the safest spot for them to start. So if you're having trouble working with your executive and you want to get them more active, especially if it's a CEO, let's just focus on culture and employer brand. We don't need to even touch anything else. And do a lot with that. And it would be super valuable.
You're going to get a lot of back for it in terms of goodwill with employees too.
Right. For sure. Yeah. I'm kind of surprised more people don't do that one too. There's a guy outside of healthcare named Jeff Jones, who's the CEO of H&R Block, who's really good at that. Like he talks about the Block stuff on his profile, but you can see him commenting. He's commenting on employee stuff all the time, and the employees notice it. And even just like a comment strategy like that, I think would go a long ways too.
Yeah, that's a great example. Let's talk a little bit about metrics and defining success. How do you look at defining success differently when it comes to executive presence? Like, what are you telling them are the things we need to be looking at to measure success there for the investment of time that they put in?
It's an interesting topic because usually we're so focused on the numbers when it comes to social media, and there's certainly numbers to look at. Of course, we're looking at number of posts, bare minimum. We're looking at number of engagements. We're looking at awareness. We're looking at video views, all that stuff. We're tracking all that stuff. But at some of the most impactful stuff usually is the anecdotal like comments, like who is commenting, what is the comment, what is the tonality of the comments, all that kind of stuff usually is much more impactful because that's, it's direct feedback. It's usually positive, which is good. And even if it is negative, it's usually constructive, where it's like, okay, what can we do with that? So to me, the comments are so valuable on some of these executive profiles. That's where it's not necessarily a measurement thing, but when we're measuring success, if we're seeing comments, whether it's from employees giving great feedback or whether it's a customer recognizing something or a partner that sees something and comments, that tends to go a lot further than if I just share the numbers with the executive and see where we're going.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think unfortunately, maybe the quantitative metrics are still going to be important, right? They're like the baseline story, right? Like, are we seeing growth over time, right? That baseline justification of the work that we're doing, but the real richness and the true value comes in the qualitative piece of, so-and-so made this comment, or for the first time ever, this person is now, following this executive that, is an important relationship for them.
Well, and it could be some of the anecdotal stuff too, like you talked about before, speaking gigs, right? Like, let's say they accept, let's
Yes,
get on the stage more. Well, what if a few of those people reach out on LinkedIn? They're direct leads from LinkedIn. Like, that's super valuable. Or
absolutely.
if it's a job, if it's employer brand play and you start getting people say, well, I saw Jim, LinkedIn, and what he said really resonated with me. If someone says an interview, like, think about how impactful that is for the HR team. So there's other ways.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's a squishy measurement sometimes, but like, it's usually pretty easy to pick the pieces when they kind of scatter across the organization a little bit.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about tone, because I think that can be a real balancing act in healthcare. We've talked a little bit about some of the challenges in healthcare. You mentioned HIPAA. I think in healthcare, leaders want to be relatable. They want to be human, but they don't want to lose that, call it scientific, maybe academic, data-driven point of view that they believe makes them credible as a healthcare expert. And so for you, when you're coaching an executive, how do you help them strike that right balance between human and data driven to maintain that credibility as an expert?
I usually try to coach them that, like, we want to lead with the humanity and use the data and the facts to back up claims. So we're not going to
Love it.
lead data, because, like, when you think about storytelling 101, right, like, people are connected to emotions and stories, not data. We know that, in facts, like, they forget facts very quickly,
Yeah.
probably now more than ever, sadly, to tell you the truth. But we still need them. And you're right, there a lot of them are clinicians, physicians, whatever their background is, so they're very, very much data focused. So we're going to include the data, but we're going to lead with emotion, we're going to lead with humans, we're going to lead with storytelling, and we're going to weave in the data to support that later. And that usually works pretty good. Like you said, they still want to get it in there. They still want to have that sense of trust and reputation with their colleagues usually. So as long as we get it in there, it's good. But we just can't lead with the numbers, because no one's going to care. People are going to give up real quick. So
And I think it could depend on the leader too. Some of them just are going to tend to be a little bit more academic, depending what their background is, right? If they, to your point earlier, came more from an engineering background, like, that's just going to be where their brain automatically goes. And I think it is going to have to require that sort of constant reminder and beating of that drum from our perspective, from the marketing team perspective, to keep saying, like, great job, you're doing a great job. Remember, let's use more relatable language, everyday language, keep it at that, 8th grade level, whatever the brand sort of guideline is on that, so that we can continue to enhance that emotional connection with people and grow the amount of engagements that they're having. If a CMO is listening today, and they can only take one step in the next 90 days to really level up their executive social strategy, what would your recommendation be on that one step to take in the next 90 days?
I mean, for a CMO to level up his or her,
To help level up their brand's executive social presence, because so it could be for one leader or it could be for multiple leaders.
I would say, I mean, really the number one thing is injecting more of that human relatability into the content, I think, because, again, I see so much stiffness on LinkedIn and so much risk aversion. And the more humanity they can inject into it, the better. There's a guy that I used to coach over at Cargill named Florian Schotteman, and he's their, oh man, I forget his title, but he's their CIO, he's their chief technology or innovation officer, something like that. I forgot his exact title. And he's a really good example of that. He injects the human stuff in there just enough where he's relatable. People like him. That comes through in the content. He does all his own content, as far as I know. He's kind of like my number one case study on how to do it really well. And he's got a lot of pictures of himself out there. And that's what brings that human nature to his content. That's the number one thing, because anyone could get up there and, like, talk about their earnings calls and promote the press releases that we're pushing out and all this other stuff. But, like, no one cares about that. The hard stuff is, like, how do we show some vulnerability? How do we be a human being? How do you talk about the culture in a real, authentic way? Like, that's the stuff that's going to cut through the clutter. And I have the hardest time getting executives to buy into that. But once you get a few to do it, it's like, okay, that person
Yes.
feels like a home run.
Well, before we wrap up, Arik, I got a few quick fire questions for you here. Just short and sweet, whatever comes to mind. What's one small habit or behavior that separates strong executive voices from forgettable ones on social media?
I would say language more than ever. I mean, in our words and language, like in our, on social now with AI and everything, everything's so watered down. To your point about the executives before, stop talking in MBA speak and all the corporate jargon, like leaders that talk in like a relatable way at 8th grade reading level with real, I don't say punchy, but like language that resonates with people, but captures attention. To me, that's the biggest thing. Just it really comes down to good writing, really, for us, because we're the ones working with them. So good writing matters more than ever, I think.
What's one social media buzzword you wish would just retire forever?
I don't know about forever, but join the conversation seems like it's pretty irrelevant at this point. 15 years ago, it was awesome. Like we were joining the conversation, and it was wonderful. But there's no conversations anymore on social media outside of LinkedIn, really. The rest of the networks are really entertainment networks. So like there's no conversations happening anymore.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective for sure. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received about building influence?
I would say, just as lame as it sounds, just being yourself, like finding a way to build influence by just being yourself is probably the most powerful thing. Because if you fake it and you're trying to be a thought leader, you're trying to be influential, people are going to see that through that stuff. So just being yourself and seeing the world through your own eyes. I mean, that's what I coach the young Tommies at the University of St. Thomas, where I teach as an adjunct. It's like, you have a valuable perspective on the world. All of us do. So that's what you have to play up, is your unique perspective. And so I think that's kind of all our superpowers, really.
Yeah, I love that. Not lame at all. Use your superpower. Use your unique perspective. Okay, last question. Fill in the blank, Arik. In executive social, you don't have to be perfect. You have to be blank.
Real, for sure. I think, again, that's been a common thread of our discussion today, is this authenticity and realness. That's what people want. I mean, I just read in the paper this morning on an op-ed, people in rural Minnesota talking about what they want from their elected officials, and people saying, we just want people to talk to us like we're a person. And
yes,
like everyone wants that. And that's what people want from leaders too. Same thing. So elected officials, healthcare leaders, it's all the same, really. People just want to be taught. They want to be told the truth. They want to be talked to like a real person. They want respect. Not too tough to do, really, in my opinion. But and hopefully we'll see more of that from our elected officials and our leaders on LinkedIn in the future.
Agreed. Well, this has been super insightful today, Arik. Thank you so much for joining me, for all the practical advice, honest advice. Just say, for all the marketing leaders out there, I hope today's conversation really inspired you to think bigger about executive visibility, not as a vanity play, but as a true driver of trust and influence for your brand and credibility as well. So, Arik, where can our listeners get in touch with you if they're interested in connecting or learning more?
Of course, you can find me on LinkedIn at Arik Hanson. Name is spelled funny, ArikHanson. Or you can find me at my website, arikhanson.com, ArikHanson.
Wonderful. Again, thanks so much for joining me. This was I know I learned a lot today. It was great chatting with you on this topic.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning into the Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence, because the future of healthcare depends on it. We'll see you next time.